Hi guys, some of you guys were absent yesterday, so I wanted to make this quick video on what you guys missed from class. So we should remember this from 8th grade when we did the Pythagorean Theorem. We do know that the Pythagorean Theorem says that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay? Remember that a and b will always be the two sides that are touching my 90-degree angle if I have a picture. So if I look at number 1, my 90-degree angle is right here. Therefore, x and 2 and the square root of 2 will be a and b. These are always the two sides that are touching the 90-degree angle, and I always want to label those first before I want to answer any questions. So I have A, B, therefore my longest side should be C, and it's also called the hypotenuse. I'm going to always use the Pythagorean theorem to solve for the missing side when I have a right triangle or a 90-degree angle. So I'm going to start by setting up my equation. And we said we have a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I'm going to be substituting instead of the a, I am going to replace it with the number that is given to me in the triangle. So I'm going to take out the letter a and I'm going to replace it with the letter x. That's the one that corresponds to on my triangle. I'm going to put the plus sign because my equation says plus. Then I'm going to replace the b with 2 and the square root of 2 because that's what corresponds to on my triangle. Now please be really careful. Some mistakes that I saw when you guys were working on your assignments, you are getting rid of the square root. So make sure that if it has a square root, if a side has a square root, I write it into my equation in parentheses. Then I substitute for the c. Parentheses as well, square root of 15. Close parentheses, then square. I substituted my values into my formula. So the next thing that I do is I'm going to put everything I can in my calculator. X squared is just going to stay as x squared. In my calculator, I am going to put 2 on the square root of 2 squared. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to get our calculators. And we are going to put 2 and the square root of 2. So 2 in parentheses. Remember that if we're doing parentheses because we have a square root, we have 2 and the square root of 2 squared. Press enter and my answer is 8. So that goes into my formula here. Equals, then I'm going to do the same thing with the square root of 15. I get my calculator and I put parentheses. Do not forget parentheses, please. Sorry guys, we're having technical difficulties like always. So close parentheses again on my calculator because it has 2 open parentheses. I square it and I get 15. That's what I put in my equation here. Okay, the next step is we want to solve for x, so I'm going to get rid of the 8. It's plus 8, so I'm going to do opposite, minus 8. Whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. Then I'm left with x squared equals 15 minus 8, which is going to be 7. Notice how I have an exponent of 2. To cancel the exponent of 2, now I must take the square root. Whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. This will cancel out, and my answer should be x equals the square root of 7, or if we're doing yesterday's paper, I told you guys could write decimals. So the approximation of the square root of 7 is going to be 2.65. So that would be my answer for number 1 here. Okay, now I'm going to erase it and I'm going to work on number 2. For number 2, I do the same thing. I'm still working with the Pythagorean theorem. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. The first thing I do, I label my triangle. Remember that A and B are the two sides that touch the 90-degree angle. So I have A, I have B, and C would be the longest side, or the side that does not touch the 90-degree angle. Now I'm going to substitute what I have into my formula. So instead of I have A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Instead of the A, I'm going to use 2 on the square root of 2. Always square, do not forget that, please. Plus, instead of B, I'm going to use the square root of 5 squared. Equals C squared, which is going to be X squared. When I put into my calculator 2 and the square root of 2 squared, that's going to give me 8. Plus, when I take the square root of 5 squared, that's going to give me 5. Equals X squared. If you guys do not believe me, you guys can go ahead and put in the calculator 2 square root of 2 squared. Make sure we put it in parentheses though. Then we add 8 plus 5, which gives me 13. I still have X squared. Remember, to get rid of an exponent, I take the square root. Whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. So my answer is X equals the square root of 13, or the approximation. Let's do that really quickly. So the square root of 13 is 3.61. Okay, I hope you guys do not have any questions on this section. If you still do, please go ahead and ask me when you guys come to class. Now we're going to go over the next section that you guys missed, which is going to be to determine whether triangles are right, acute, or obtuse, which is considered the converse of the Pythagorean theorem. So we're going to need some rules that we need to follow, and they are the following. If I have C squared equals to A squared plus B squared, then we have a right triangle. If I have C squared is greater than A squared plus B squared, then I'm going to be forming an obtuse triangle. And the last rule says that if C squared is less than A squared plus B squared, I am going to be forming an acute triangle. So now that we have our rules, we're going to check. The trick for this one is there is no 90-degree angle, so I don't know which one's the A, which one's the B, or which one's the C. We also went over in our notes that the C is always be the longest side. So we know that C will always be the longest side. Always, always, always. So if I look at my calculations and I put in the calculator, I don't know what the square root of 14 is, so I'm going to take out my calculator and I am going to do the square root of 14. That gives me 3.74. That is bigger than 2, so far the square root of 14 is my biggest side. Then I just check, just to make sure, I'm going to check the square root of 12 because I don't know what that equals to. So the square root of 12 is going to give me 3.46. That means that the biggest side is the square root of 14. That makes square root of 14 my C. That makes this my A, this the B. Now we're going to write our equation. I am going to check if C squared is equal to A squared plus B squared, if C squared is greater than A squared plus B squared, or if C squared is less than A squared plus B squared. So I'm going to write my equation. C squared. I'm going to leave a space because I don't know if they're equal, greater than, or less than. And then I'm going to write A squared plus B squared. I am going to substitute what I have. Parentheses, remember, don't forget, square root of 14, close parentheses, squared. I leave the space. Then I put the square root of 12 instead of the A. I'm replacing it, I'm substituting. Plus 2 squared. I'm going to take out my calculator and I am going to put the square root of 14 squared. Parentheses, the square root of 14
the square root of 14, close parentheses, then squared, is just going to give me 14.
I'm going to write that. Then I'm going to use my calculator again and I'm going to put parentheses, square root of 12
squared, square root of 12 squared plus parentheses 2 close parentheses squared. That gives me a total of 16.
So I'm going to write it down in my paper. 16. What is bigger, 14 or 16? Of course 16 is bigger. Therefore my sign is going to be less than. So I know that C squared is less than A squared plus B squared. So I'm going to match it to one of my rules. My rule says if C squared is less than A squared plus B squared, then my triangle is going to be acute. Therefore, number 1 for my assignment here is going to be acute triangle. Okay, let's try to do this again. Make sure that you write your formulas because I'm going to be erasing all of this. So let's delete our formulas and we're going to go ahead and start with number 2. First thing I do, I find the biggest number. So my biggest number is going to be 16. That means that that is my C. Then the other two numbers can be A and B. I write my formula like always, C squared, a space, A squared plus B squared, and I'm going to be substituting the numbers. Instead of the C, I'm going to put parentheses 16 squared, a space in between, and then I'm going to put parentheses 7 squared plus parentheses 3 square root of 23, close parentheses, and squared. Make sure that we're following all of the steps. So I'm going to take my calculator and I am going to put 16 squared. That's going to give me 256. So I will write 256. I leave my space. I grab the calculator one more time and I'm going to press parentheses 7, close parentheses, squared, plus, open another parentheses, and I put 3 and the square root of 23. Square. Do not forget to square, please. Then we press enter and I have 256. So you guys just ask yourself, is 256 bigger, equal to, or less than 256? Of course they're going to be equal. Therefore c squared equals a squared plus b squared. What does my rule say? If they're equal, that means that we have a right triangle. So far we have a right triangle. Then we're done with problem number 2. Now we're going to be moving to problem number 3. Process is still the same thing. So I'm going to first label A, B, and C. So which one would be the biggest side? I don't know what 7 in the square root of 5 is, so I'm going to find out. I get my calculator and I'm just going to check really quickly because I don't want to make an error. So I'm going to put 7 and the square root of 5. That gives me 15.65. That is bigger than 13, so that's the longest side. So I'm going to label my problem with A, B, and C. We get our equation c squared space a squared plus b squared. The next step is going to be to substitute. So instead of c, I put 7 square root of 5, close parentheses, and squared. We leave our space. Instead of a, I use the number 13, squared because the formula says to square. Instead of the b, I use the 7 and squared. So we're going to put everything in our calculators. So let's start by putting, whoops, my bad. Always parentheses first. 7 square root of 5, and we square that. That gives me 245. So I get 245. I leave the space. Now I'm going to check the other side. So I'm going to put 13 squared plus 7 squared. That's going to give me a total of 218. Now you're going to ask yourselves, what is bigger, 245 or 218? Of course, 245 is 18. So we know that c squared is bigger than a squared plus b squared. So my triangle is going to be an obtuse triangle. Okay. I hope this helps for yesterday's work, guys. For today's assignment, we went over simplifying radicals. So that's our next page. Simplifying radicals. It's really hard to see, or a little bit hard to see. So on today's assignment, question number 15 wanted you to simplify the square root of 90. Question number 16 on today's assignment said, let me delete that because it's all bad. So question number 16 said, simplify the square root of 32. So let's start with number 15, which is 90. Remember that to do the square root of 90, I always want to break down the number as much as possible. What two numbers can I multiply to get 90? And there are many combinations I can do. I can multiply 9 times 10. That gives me 90. I'm going to ask myself, can I break down the 9? Are there other multiples of 9 other than 9 times 1? Yes, there is. I can multiply 3 times 3, and that gives me 9. Once I break down a number, it leaves, it disappears. There is nothing I can multiply to form another 3, so I'm done with 3's. I leave the 3's alone. Now I'm going to work with number 10. Are there any other numbers I can multiply to form a 10? Yes, there is. I can multiply 2 times 5, and they give me 10. I get rid of the 10 because I already broke it down. I cannot break down 2, I cannot break down 5. So the next step is going to be to form pairs. So I'm going to form a pair of 3's. Remember, to form a pair, I need to put two numbers that are the same together. So 3 and 3, they're the same number, so they form a pair. What I'm going to do next is I am going to draw my square root. It looks like a little house. There's inside and then there's outside. Here is the outside of the house. Here is the inside of the house. Okay? Every pair that we make will go on the outside of the house. Every not pair, so if they're by themselves, like 2 and 5, I'm going to put them inside of the house. Think about dating. When we date, we go in pairs, couples. If we do not have a date, then we stay home. We stay inside the house. So, a pair of 3 goes outside of the house. So, one pair of 3's goes outside of the house. So, I use the number 3. 1 because I have one pair of 3's. 2 and 5 do not have a pair, so they go inside of the house. So, I put a 2 multiplied by a 5. If I have more than one number inside the house, I'm going to multiply them. If I have more than one number outside of the house, I'm going to multiply them. So my final answer should be 3. Square root 5 times 2 is 10. That is the square root of 90 simplified to its lowest form. If I want to check if I'm doing it correctly, what I can do is I get the calculator.
And I am going to make sure I am doing it correctly by pressing the square root of 90. Press enter. It gives me a decimal. Once I simplify it, I am going to just put it here in the calculator, make sure that I'm doing it correctly. That's what I got, so I'm going to press enter. See how it gives me the same decimal? Exactly the same decimal. That means that I am doing it correctly. I just simplified the square root of 90. I did not change it, I just simplified it. So therefore it should give me the same decimal. If it gives me the same decimal, then that means I did it correctly. And I am done. So let's try to work with the square root of 32. I'm going to try to simplify this as much as possible. So I'm going to think about two numbers that I can multiply so that I can form 32. So I am thinking about the number 8 and 4. I can multiply 8 times 4 and it gives me 32. I can break down the 8 into 4 times 2. I can break down the 4 into 2 times 2. Get rid of that one.
now that I'm done on the left side, I'm going to go to the right side. I can break down the 4 into 2 and 2, and I am done. So I draw a circle around my pairs so that I do not get confused. So I have one pair of 2's, I have another pair of 2's, and I'm left with 1 2. I draw my little house. Remember that inside the house is the ones that are by themselves. So that's all by itself, so it's inside of the house, all lonely. Now on the outside of the house, we have our couples. I have one couple of 2's, so I put a 2. Remember, we're always multiplying if I have more than one outside. I have another pair of 2's, so I put another 2. Multiply what's outside. 2 times 2 is 4. I only have one number inside, so that stays the same. So my answer simplified should be 4 in the square root of 2. Now let's double check just to make sure we're doing it correctly. Get your calculators and try it.
The square root of 32 equals 5.6568, a really long decimal. Then I'm going to do the same thing with my answer, 4 and the square root of 2. Voila! I got the same answer, 5.6568, 5.6568. All of the decimals match, so I did it correctly. Yay! So I hope this helps, guys. Once we know how to simplify, everything else should be easier. Now we should not get any decimals in any problem. Once we're solving for the missing side, our answers should look like this. No more decimals. We're going to simplify our square roots using what we know. I hope this helps, guys. If it does not, please make sure to write any questions that you have. Pause the video, and you guys can work on the problems that they pertain to. So if you still have any questions, please come to tutoring or ask me during class time.